And the Snarkcast continues now with the true legend of the genre, a playwright and published author, unknown to daytime when hired by Procter & Gamble in 1971, a fresh voice, 8 years as head writer for one of the most beloved serials ever, work that garnered a Daytime Emmy for Another World during a period many longtime fans considered the golden era for the show. Joining me now is Mr. Harding Lemay. Mr. Lemay, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
8 years, certainly a long stretch, especially by today's standards. Knowing that fans hold you in such high regard, some 30 years after Another World won that Emmy, still today you are considered one of the greatest head writers ever. How rewarding is that sort of recognition?
Well, it was very rewarding at the time and still is. It's very nice to be remembered. I've moved on to writing other things, of course, but there was something very special about Another World when I took it over. It wasn't doing very well in the ratings, and I didn't know anything about soap operas. I'd never even watched one when they asked me to watch it and then see if I would write it. But I found the characters interesting and wanted to make them into different kinds of characters than the usual soaps, which were pretty vanilla at that time.
So, when you began on the show, did you have an agenda? Was there something specific that you wanted to do with Another World that maybe wasn't happening on other daytime dramas of the era?
Well, I had an idea when I watched it for 4 weeks before I met with them to discuss taking it over. That is, that all of us live in our own world and probably dream of another world. And that's what I wanted to do with the show, to take most of the characters and pit them against what their aspirations, what their hopes were, rather than what their present was. I wanted really to build a kind of optimism in the show.
I interviewed As the World Turns Don Hastings earlier this year, and we talked a little bit about Erna Phillips. And he offered a very distinctive, colorful description of Miss Phillips. And just prior to taking on Another World, you spent, about 6 months working with her on stories and scripts?
Not quite that long, probably more like 3 or 4 months. We didn't get on particularly. We had completely different points of view about life in general and also certainly about writing. She thought people were either good or bad. They were either saints or sinners. I thought people have both. I mean, I thought people were good sometimes and bad sometimes, depending on what they wanted. And she did teach me the techniques, because I knew nothing at all about it. How to carry 3 stories at the same time. I was basically a playwright and not used to interweaving stories that way. And she was very good at that. She was but she was a rather difficult lady. And very preemptive and wanted things always her way. And I finally told Procter & Gamble that I couldn't work with her anymore. Either they'd have to use me on my own or get someone else, and they decided to keep me.
What was Miss Phillips' reaction to that? Was she...
Oh, she wasn't very pleasant to me after that.
Well, I tell you what, though, she is, as well as you, a legend.
Oh, yes, she was quite... Well, she introduced the form, basically, and did marvelous work in the early years. And I think she's still, she was a very interesting and creative woman. It's just that I've come from a totally different background and have totally different points of view about the way people live. And I wanted the show to be more realistic. I was sick of these charming housewives showing up at each other's doors with cakes and cookies and talking about all their families. I wanted really to move into more deeper character relationships.
Well, and true, so much a part of your writing is known for its strong character development, trademark of your work even today. Is there still room for that sort of writing in daytime?
I don't watch daytime at all anymore. I never watched it after I left the show. It wasn't, and I seldom watched it actually while I was writing the show because I didn't want to be influenced by other shows. And so I don't really know what's going on in daytime.
Well, right now I can tell you that fans are very unhappy with the
quality
of the quality of writing. They're very disappointed, and of course that's reflected in the ratings as well. The ratings obviously aren't what they used to be. So
I think there's a whole different kind of television today. I mean, there was no such thing as reality show when I was writing, and actually there was very little cable. I don't think there was cable when I started. Certainly there wasn't. So the viewer has many more choices today than he had back to 40 years ago, 30 years ago.
You were the first writer to attempt to introduce a young gay character to the daytime audience. Of course, we know Procter & Gamble ultimately pulled that story of Michael Randolph. Do you at all view yourself, as a result of your work, as a pioneer of daytime?
No, I never thought of myself as a pioneer, but I thought what I was doing was trying to bring a different kind of form, a more Chekhovian dramatic form where lives are internalized much more than they were. And I think we succeeded in that because we had such wonderful actors.
Yes.
And they were mostly stage actors. Paul Rausch, who was the producer, and I were both trained for the theater. And we hired many, many very good stage actors, and you could write all kinds of stuff for them. That was, they were used to doing. They were used to doing what we call the subtext, what's underneath the lines. And that's, as a playwright, that's always what I wrote. And so it was wonderful to have a chance to do it with these very gifted actors. I mean, Connie Ford, Doug Watts, and everybody on that show was absolutely marvelous.
In those days, did you write the show from home, or did you have an office at the studio?
No, I've never written from an office. I always wrote from home because I get up about 4 in the morning when I'm working on a show, and write until perhaps 11 or 12, and then either go to the gym or do something to get my mind off, and then I'd do my own work.
Wow. Did you spend much time on or near the set then, since you worked from home?
I went in perhaps once every 2 weeks, no more.
Mm-hmm. Did you develop a rapport with any of the actors that were on the show?
Well, because I'd done a lot of theater work, I knew some of them.
Uh-huh.
I knew Doug Watts, and as a matter of fact, I asked. I was the one that got him on the show, basically, because I thought he was such a tremendous actor. And but I got to know them socially more, and several of them, Beverly McKenzie and Connie Ford and Ray Liotta, and some of those people did plays of mine too at the same time. So I got to know them that way.
Do these friendships extend on into today? Do you still keep in touch with folks that you worked with on Another World so many years ago?
Well, Irene Daly is still in touch, Beverly McKenzie, who's out on the coast. But a lot of them are no longer with us, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Connie's dead. Doug is dead, Time goes on and they fall by the wayside.
Yeah. But it's nostalgia. People remember so fondly those days. And as I mentioned earlier, they refer to your period writing Another World as a golden era. Do you share that belief? I know that you've been very modest here in the interview today, but you know what good writing and bad writing is. And
I think there was good writing on Another World. I think that there's good and bad writing in every form. There are bad novels, there are bad plays, there are bad soap operas, and they're good in every form too. Mm-hmm. I just think that what Another World accomplished in a way was a kind of character truthfulness. That my real concern was to make sure that nobody on that show did anything that was not totally motivated by human needs or human aspirations. And it worked. Yes. But I didn't know how to write anything else. I hate writing trials and murder things and all that, and I did very little of it, actually. Only when Procter & Gamble sort of twisted my arm.
Did they ever try to influence you to go in a direction you didn't want to go, given the success of other shows? I know during that period, Young and the Restless debuted and was a really big show.
Yes, they did. As a matter of fact, they were always trying to get me to have more younger characters, and I never found writing for young characters terribly interesting because they haven't lived long enough to be interesting. And so that my tendency was to put them in scenes with older people, so that I tended to do generational things much more about parents and children, like Michael Randolph and his parents. Mm-hmm. And that was not considered what they wanted, particularly in the late 70s. They wanted the youth market, And Young and Restless was a very good show on that level. I mean, it did that very well. But that sort of thing never really interested me. And they would try to make me do it, and I'd always threaten to quit. Or, we'd have these blow-ups, and they'd say, okay, do it your way.
Another World expanded to a full hour in 1975. How much heavier was the workload for you at that point?
In many ways, it was easier. I was one of the strong proponents of doing it for an hour because I wanted to write longer scenes. I really wanted to have a scene between the two characters that would take in some of the little details of life as well as the big dramatic ones. You go in soaps, you used to go from dramatic peak to dramatic peak, but the stories got ridiculous. They were all amnesia. They were all, all kinds of ridiculous stories. I wanted to go more deeply into what attracted young people to each other, what the conflicts were in families when the young people were doing things their parents didn't approve of. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you need more time. I mean, a scene used to be about 2 minutes. and in a half hour. And if you went to a half hour, went to an hour, my feeling was then I could expand that scene to 4 or to 5 minutes. Of course, what I didn't realize is later on, when all the shows were going to an hour, they would split that 5 or 6 minutes into 2 or 3 different stories. Because that wasn't my intention. I really wanted to do long stories, as you do in a play, where you can build a scene very carefully up to a climax. And that was fun. And because of the numerous actors we had who were stage actors, they responded to that very well. I mean, it really worked beautifully, I thought, for about 5 or 6 years.
90 minutes in length. It didn't seem to work. Was there any way that it could have?
No. I thought it was a ridiculous idea. It was the idea of the producer at NBC to do that, Freddie Silverman. And I fought it and lost it, because I think you cannot write that way for actors. I mean, an actor, in order to keep a story going, you'd have to use an actor in 6 out of 9 scenes, let's say, and 3 times a week, and that's an awful lot of work. And also for the viewer's attention can't be stretched that much. And I didn't think it would work, and it didn't work. I mean, it's. I think I quit after about 15 weeks of that, because I couldn't make it work. And there's nothing worse than writing something that you don't believe in.
Did the disappointment and the difficulties from that period, have they faded?
No. As a matter of fact, I really didn't intend to stay that long writing soaps, because I was basically a playwright. And I had 2 small children to put through school and a lot of expenses. And once that was out of the way, I could again begin to think in terms of what I really wanted to write, which was plays. And I've been doing that ever since. And I had done it before. But the thing is, I think you get burned out so quickly writing soaps, because I lasted longer than some, I think, because I'm fairly disciplined as a writer. But to turn out a script every day for 8 years, an hour script, and to create the story, do the breakdowns that are approved by the network and the producers, and then do the scripts, this is what I was doing. It burns you out very quickly. And I think I lasted longer than I should have in many ways. And I was tired of doing it by the time I was through.
Sure. Looking back, as you may have been asked this question 1,000 times over, any regrets? Is there anything specific that you would have done differently now, looking back?
I don't know. I think I would have gone more deeply into some of the social questions. Aggie Nixon did a lot of very good work on All My Children about bringing up real social questions. The problems of abortion when it was not legal, the problems of the gay life. Procter & Gamble put the damper on a lot of those things, and Aggie, of course, didn't have that problem at ABC. They let her do pretty much what she wanted. And she did create what was very relevant soap operas, I thought, both in One Life to Live and in Guiding Light. I would have liked to have gone in that direction, but it was an uphill fight all the time to do that. And you get tired of fighting after a while. You may win a few of the battles, but you really, in the long run, you just get defeated.
One of your greatest creations, Iris, of course.
Oh, yes.
Beverly McKinsey, another beloved icon of daytime television. What was it like for you to see her take your material and bring it to life in a way that only she could?
She is an extraordinary actress, and always was. I wrote a part, a 3-show part of one of the Frame sisters, the oldest Frame sister, and Beverly played it. Emma, her name was, and it was a country woman. And I was struck by her. I'd seen her on the stage before that. I was struck by the physicalization she did, that she always carried her purse in front of her stomach, for instance, the way country women do who aren't used to carrying purses. And I found her a fascinating character. And when I began to write Iris, I wanted an actress who would have that kind of physicalization. And she was perfect. I think she's absolutely wonderful performance. Well, Beverly is one of those astonishing actors. She did a play of mine with Connie Ford at one time. And she has an astonishing memory. I mean, I gave her 3 pages of changes in the script on the play and said, could you have these by tomorrow night? It was before a performance. She said, I can have them by this night's performance, and she did. She had a photographic memory, which made her difficult for some actors because she not only knew her lines, she knew theirs. And as many actors paraphrase on soaps because they don't really learn their lines, she got very difficult with certain actors. She just wouldn't work with one. She just wouldn't work with him at all, and he was playing her husband. And because he wouldn't learn his lines. And, she had to do both parts, she said. But I admired that in her. She was extremely professional.
Mm. Iris's maid, Vivian. I've read that the character, as created by you, was modeled after someone very special.
It was modeled after one of my relatives, actually.
Uh-huh.
And I gave her my mother's name, Goro, maiden name. Vivian was a wonderful character. And we had seen the actress in Dracula on Broadway, and she was very funny as the maid in that. And so I immediately wrote a part for her. Mm-hmm. And they kept her. And then there was Louise Goddard, who was a wonderful character to write, and Anne Meacham's part.
Another much-loved creation of yours was Mac Corey. What are your fondest memories of Douglas Watson?
Well, Douglas was a very good, close, dear friend of mine. And over the years, he and his wife were great friends of ours. And the warmth that Douglas had as a human being came through as an actor. I mean, everything about Mac Corey was really Douglas. That kind of bemused look he had all the time, and a kind of wisdom. He was a remarkable man. Mm-hmm. And I was delighted. You know, we had a different actor playing Mac Corey at the very beginning.
Yes.
A very good stage actor named Robert Emmett, Emmart. And he was very good, but he didn't have that quality that I wanted, because I wanted to switch Rachel into a more sympathetic character, and I wanted her to finally get what she wanted out of life, which was a very rich, loving husband, and change her from being the bitch she was when I took the show over. And that was why I wanted Iris. I wanted to bring another kind of woman who was the heavy, and let Vicky become the Rachel who would be more sympathetic. And the only way that could have worked was to give her a romance with an older man, particularly a man who had some kind of gravitas. And it worked, because the minute they had a scene together, I said, yeah, that's going to work. And the scene was wonderful, because it was Max stopped by to pick up his grandson, who was playing with Vicky's grandson, with Rachel's son, actually, Jamie. And Max stops by, and they were sitting by the pool, watching the boys play in the pool, and Vicky Wyndham looked Mac Corey up and down from the foot to the head, and back down again. And I said, that's going to work, and it did.
And it was
one of those lucky things.
And it was one of daytime's greatest couples.
Oh yes. And also they fought a lot, which was, it was interesting to write a marriage in which it was not just always soap sudsy. That's where Erna and I disagreed a great deal. I thought marriage has a great deal of tension in it, a great deal of disagreement in it, and it's very dramatic, because you can have that and still love each other, and that's what I really wanted to do, and that worked very well with Mac and Rachel.
Yes, it did. And again, with Another World being rerun on SoapNet and people being able to relive, unfortunately, some of the later years, I know a lot of us fans, me included, we wanted to see the stuff from the 70s, and I realize the archives don't go back that far.
The Procter & Gamble never kept them.
Yeah, they destroyed the tapes.
Yeah. Nobody thought in those days that anybody would be interested in seeing them, in later years. Mm-hmm. I'm sure that they could have been shown throughout the world, because even when we're in Europe, people talk about the American soap operas of the 70s.
Yes. Well, and again, your work, it stands out most definitely. You worked closely for many years with executive producer Paul Roche. And could you have achieved the success you did at Another World without him?
I think we were a very good pair. I think Paul was a wonderful producer. He was a man of great instinct about scenes, how scenes work. He knew what acting was about, and he had a great visual sense. I mean, I would watch. The few times I went to the studio, I was always impressed, because he would say, not yellow. Don't let him wear the yellow sweater. Get him a light blue sweater. He'd have all these things. His visual sense is much stronger than mine. But he also was a hard taskmaster for writers. Not with me particularly, because we rather quickly established, what our boundaries were with each other. And I always enjoyed working with him. He's a really remarkable man. I don't know what he's doing now, but boy, he was really something.
What are the first thoughts that come to mind when I say the name Douglas Marland?
Oh, Doug, he was a good friend too. Douglas, and worked with me on Another World. He was he had an agent who kept nagging me to give him a script, and to use him. And I don't like being nagged about it. And I finally did agree to meet him, and I liked him. And he had been an actor, and he understood a lot about soaps from that point of view, because he had been on some. But Douglas was very quick. He was very, very quick to learning. And I remember that I had begun to move away from using other writers, because it's much harder to rewrite a script than it is to write it yourself, as far as I'm concerned. And he came to me, and he was very upset because he'd been offered a good job on The Doctors, I think it was. And I advised him to take it because I thought he should be on his own show. He had a much darker kind of vision of life than mine. Mm-hmm. I'm more optimistic than Douglas was. But I always admired what he did, and I particularly admired what he did with As the World Turns.
Yes.
He did very good work. And he was a dear man. He was a very good man.
And, of course, he received as well a lot of critical acclaim for that work on As the World Turns.
Oh, yes.
Again, people, as they view your era of Another World as a golden age, they view Douglas Marland's era on As the World Turns as a golden age for that show.
Yes, yeah, and I agree with him. I think Douglas was really a remarkably good... There are 4 or 5 names that I know. Uh-huh. I don't know all the writers on soaps, but I think Agnes Nixon and Douglas Marland were 2 of the really fine writers.
We talked a little bit earlier about the ratings being down today, and there's a lot of things that we can credit for that. But Mr. Lemay, you've worked in the industry. Is there another reason that maybe things are not so rosy for soap operas? The networks, production companies, do they have some hand in that?
Well, I always think that the network interference with story was a disaster. It was on Another World. One of the reasons I finally left it was that the network had much more to say. When I first took the show over, the networks, I didn't even deal with the networks. Paul did. I mean, if I had a complaint, I'd tell it to Paul, and he'd take it to the network. And if they had a complaint, they'd tell it to him, and he'd bring it to me. But later on, they'd sit in on the meetings, and they had crazy ideas about stories. They're very quick to knock a story down without examining exactly what it is. Mm-hmm. And I found it very difficult to work with them. And I think that's been one of the contributing factors to the decrease of interest in soap operas. What they always wanted was for you to do something somebody else was doing. Yeah. Why don't you do what Days of Our Lives is doing, or why don't you do what Young and the Restless is doing? And I'd say, well, why don't we do what we do? And but I don't know. They're so afraid of losing ratings.
Well, and of course, it's happened in a big way. They're not doing too good right now.
No, and that was beginning when I left.
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember when at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when General Hospital, Another World, and whatever the other show was on the air, we had huge audiences, mm-hmm. and I don't think one show has what all 3 of us had together.
Wow. I think that the highest ratings now, I think they averaged in those days, what was it, maybe an 8 and a 9? Being optimistic now, they're lucky if they get a 4.0.
Yeah, somebody told me that. But then I don't watch enough television to really gauge it. I hardly ever watch nighttime television except for the news. Mm-hmm. And I just find, but it's true in everything. It's true in book publishing. It's true in theater. There's no such thing as the kind of theater that existed 40 years ago now. Mm-hmm. There's one good, decent play on Broadway every year, but there used to be 10, 12. And the same thing with fiction. If you look at the bestseller list, you find very few books of any real literary merit on the bestseller list anymore.
Well, and that's something else that I wanted to mention to you, too, and talk to you about, is that as a whole, and maybe this is partly responsible for the downturn in ratings and other genres that you're talking about, is that there seems to be an unwillingness to allow in some fresh talent, like they did with you. And I'm kind of wondering, why do you think that is? So there's a lot of writers out there, myself included. I would love to have an opportunity to write for anything, and it just seems like the door is kind of closed there.
I think the door is closed, and I think they're afraid. They're afraid of taking a chance. I had a year to turn Another World around on that, because it was in the bottom of the ratings when I took it over, and they told me I had a year, and we did it. We did it in a year. But part of it was that I didn't quite know what I was doing. I didn't know the form, mm-hmm. and I had to do it on my own way, and it worked, and they let me do it. I don't think anybody gets that much chance anymore. If they last the 13 weeks of their first contract, it's quite unusual. And because I've done a lot of consultant work since I left Another World on other soaps, and including Another World, actually. And I find that the writers are just come and go. There's no real voice that carries a show for 2 or 3 years. And that's too bad. It robbed it of all its originality.
Mm-hmm. Are there any writers that you're aware of in daytime? I know you don't follow that closely, but surely names are bandied about, and you're aware of folks that are out there. Anybody whose work excites you or gives you some hope for the genre?
Oh, I'm afraid not. But then I don't watch it, so I can't really judge it. I was thinking, I don't think I've seen a soap now for 15 years or more, because I only would watch if an actor would call me and say he was doing something special, and would I watch it. But I don't know the names, and I don't know the shows.
There are a number of aspiring writers of various genres at the WoST website, myself included, and I've gone so far as to self-publish my own work, and I know it's a tough business, no doubt. We kind of alluded to that just a few minutes ago. What advice or words of encouragement would you offer to those of us who strive to be as successful as you have been?
Well, I was successful accidentally. It never occurred to me in my life that I would write a soap. I had published a book that was quite successful, got very good reviews, and they called me and asked me to do it, and it never would have occurred to me. I think if you want to write, I think you have to write. I think you have to start writing in whatever form you can write. But it's hard to get published. It's hard to get a play on. It's hard to get into television. But you've got to write if you want to write. And somewhere you've got to find some way of an agent or somebody opening a door for you. Very few people on the top level anymore are capable of judging anything they get in manuscript, in television. I have young friends who are trying to write for television a great deal, and the letters they get are appalling. People don't seem to know what they're talking about. Writing is a craft, and you can learn the craft, and the only way you learn a craft is by doing it over and over again.
Well,
first you start writing, and then you try to find out who, of all the people you might knows someone who might know someone who could open a door at ABC, or if it's television you want to write. It's even more difficult if you're trying to write a book. It's harder to get an agent than it is to get a publisher.
Well, I've certainly experienced that myself. It's been a difficult journey, and as you've said, some of the rejection letters you get, you do get a sense that people, gosh, they really don't know what it is that you've done. I don't think they've even looked at your synopsis or anything like that.
I agree with you. I think they don't. I worked in publishing for years, and it used to be everything that came over that threshold at Knopf, somebody read, and somebody did a little report on it, and if the report was favorable, somebody else read it. It might take 6 months, but finally it could get published. But today that doesn't exist.
What do you think of options of self-publishing for people like myself and others maybe who want...
It's a very good idea. I do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
I publish my own plays.
Wow.
I mean, my plays are published by Ex Libris, which does a lot of self-publishing, and they do a very good job.
How does the marketing work for...
Well, I don't get involved with the marketing at all because I'm not interested in the marketing. I get them published because I want them on record, and I send them to friends or send them to actors or people I know, so that I do the marketing. The general marketing, what they do at Ex Libris, is they market the books on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, and several other things online. And I don't know even if anybody's ordered mine. I've never got any royalties.
You're involved with a group called the New Dramatists.
Oh, yes.
What are the New Dramatists about? What's their purpose?
The New Dramatists was started over 50 years ago by some young playwrights who were encouraged by some rather established playwrights like Moss Hart and Howard Lindsay to just have a group of maybe 30 or 40 playwrights who would do their own plays, work in a group, understand, read each other's work. And gradually what it has evolved is it has this enormous church building. It does all kinds of work. I'm on the board, so I do a lot of work with them. But every major playwright, out of the last 6 Pulitzer Prizes, 5 of them have been New Dramatists who have come through that process. It's a 7-year thing, and it's marvelous. I learned more about writing and about how to become a writer by my first 7 years at the New Dramatists, and that was over 40 years ago.
Wow. Are you still learning? Are you still learning the craft?
I'm a board member, and when my new plays when I finish a new play, they really do a reading of it for me. and they cast it, and they get marvelous actors and directors, and you really get a chance to work with no critics, nobody else there except the people you want there, so that you can really examine your work without any outside pressures.
So, do you find yourself, as you continue writing, obviously you're still writing and working, is it still a learning experience for you, or have you kind of achieved a pinnacle?
Every play, I'm in the middle of a new play. Every play is a challenge. Anything you've written before has nothing to do with what you're writing now. It's all a new thing. There are certain things like structure, and that you can't just go on and on with exposition in the first 20 minutes. You have to build action. Those things you learn gradually. But the problem of getting down on paper what it is you want to say about people is always a difficult challenge. But it's fun, too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, writing plays, particularly, is an addiction. Once you start, you never seem to give it up.
I've never tried my hand at that. I'd like one day to be able to do that. I'd like to write a teleplay. I think it would be a challenging thing to do.
The thing about writing theatrical plays is you're writing behavior. And that's the first thing you start with when you start as a script in your head. It's, why are these people behaving the way they're behaving? What's underneath behavior? Then the dialogue comes out of that. And the visual aspects of television and film don't really exist in the theater. You can have one room with 3 characters, and you can go on for 2 hours and develop their characters. That's very hard in either television or film.
So, essentially what you're saying is, as what you did with Another World, as with anything that you write, you begin with basic human motivation. Why do they do the things?
I start always with characters. Why are they doing what they're doing? There used to be a joke about me when I was consulting that I was Mr. Why. I'd come into a meeting because I never did any of the writing then. I'd just sit in on the meetings and go over there, work with them. And my first question is, why is he doing that? And after a year or so, they begin to say, here comes Mr. Why. That is the basis of all writing, is why do people do what they do?
Well, it's the raw human emotion. It's what we do daily as we live day to day. That's the realism that you sought, I guess, in Another World.
Yeah, you heighten it somewhat, by kinds of smart dialogue and kind of quick jumps, perhaps. And if you were to take life, it would take forever. But you have to focus it. But my work was quite realistic, quite naturalistic.
Mm-hmm. It was very enjoyable, still today.
Yeah, well, I enjoy doing it.
Mm-hmm. You left Another World for good after a very brief stint in 1988. And what are some of the projects? I know you've done a lot of plays. What are the titles, and who have they involved?
Let's see. For some time, I didn't write plays. My wife was quite ill for some years, and she died in 1994. And so I didn't write plays much. I did a lot of consultant work for television. Then after she died, 4 years later, I married again. And I've written 4 plays since then, and I'm on my 5th. And it still goes back to being concerned about what people do to each other without knowing that they're doing it. The unconscious cruelties and humiliations and pain that people cause each other without really intending to. It's one of the great tragedies of life, particularly as you get to my age, when you look back and you see that you could have done things differently with your children, with your parents, with your brothers and sisters, but you didn't. So that gives you a source of material.
So a lot of what you've written over the years has been drawn from personal experience.
Oh, yes, a lot of Another World was drawn very much from personal experience. The whole Frame family was, because I'm one of 13 children, the whole Frame family was bits and pieces of my own brothers and sisters. You never really duplicate it. You use it as a jumping off point.
How have you remained active for so many years? Your longevity, obviously, is I think a testament. It's exciting for the rest of us. How have you stayed busy? How have you managed to continue on? And obviously, you're a well-adjusted, happy person.
Well, I think part of it is work. I think part of it is examining. I think a writer has a blessed life in many ways. He has a chance to think about why. Why are we here? Why do we do what we do? And so every day is exciting. You wait. You go to bed at night saying, the next morning I've got to deal with this play I'm writing on. And there's always, and I read a great deal, and I find reading is extraordinarily, I have to finish the book.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time I finish that one, I've started another one. So I have to wake up to finish the book.
Who are some of your favorite authors?
Well, my favorite author in present contemporary literature is William Faulkner, and then Camus, the French writer. And among the younger writers, I have a lot of younger writers I admire enormously. Richard Ford and Cormac McCarthy, Don DeLillo, all kinds of writers. Real solid American. Well, America's full of very good writers, but they don't sell a great deal anymore. They used to. I don't know how people make a living. The big names. I mean, Stephen King makes a living, obviously, but he writes the sort of stuff I don't read. But the serious younger writers, and younger, I mean 60 and under, there are lots of them, and they're very good.
What is the average day for Harding Lemay like? Well, I'm kind of curious. What do you do from day to day? I know you've been kept very busy. We've kind of played email tag for a good while now. But what keeps you busy during the day besides reading and writing?
Well, I'll tell you, I've divided my days up. Every other day I go to the gym. I go to the gym in the morning, and then the other days every other day I work on my play. And so that's 2 or 3 hours. I used to be able to work 4 or 5 or 6 or even 8 hours on something, but as I get older, I don't spend that much time actually writing. I may spend 2 hours or 3, but there's a lot of it is just thinking. And so that's my morning. Mm-hmm. And then there's a nap, and then lunch, and then we go to the museums, we do things, we go to the theater in the evening, a lot of off-Broadway theater, rent movies, and have a normal social life. And that's my day. And they're pretty good days. We do a lot. We go to France a lot. We go almost every year for at least a month, sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4. We stay in Paris because I love Paris. And I can work there easily because there's no interruption.
From day one, you were East Coast born, and you have remained there for so many years. You really love living in New York.
Oh, yeah. New York is so vibrant. It's so full of life. And the only other city I like is Paris, which is so beautiful and physically beautiful and relaxing. But I like both of them. For many years, until last fall, I had a summer house in the Fire Island where I'd spend the summers, and often I wrote there all summer, even when I did the soap. NBC would send a car to the boat to pick up scripts, and I'd stay out there for 10 weeks in the summer. But we sold that, and now we stay in New York. But I tell you, New York is so full. There's Meryl Streep doing a play in the park now, a Brecht play, Mother Courage. There are all kinds of things to see. And then the music, and there's everything that's in the museums. I mean, it's just a great city. It always has been. I came here when I was 17, which is, 60-some years ago. And I've never gotten over being able to be in a city like this.
Well, Harding Lemay, I thank you very much for spending this time with me.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Playwright, author, head writer, and daytime legend, Harding Lemay. Thank you, sir. The webcast continues here at the WoST website in just a moment. We'll be right back.
The golden age of Another World, Snark. We just missed it at AOL's Procter & Gamble channel with their run starting in 1980. So, effectively, the only place to see what remains of the Harding Lemay area is right here at WoST. Snark, what do you think about that?